countries where you can set up a company with a pure 0% corporate tax rate. Let's talk about it. Well, before we begin, let me tell you that, as I keep saying in countless videos, the issue of where you set up your company is usually not important at all if you are living in fiscally aggressive countries. In most cases, they will treat your company as a local business for tax purposes anyway. So understand that it's always a puzzle made up of different pieces that have to fit together. And don't think it's as simple as saying, oh, one of these companies I'm talking about, I'll just set it up while living in Spain all year and that's it. So, well, this introduction is just so you keep that in mind. As you'll see, this list of companies includes some very exotic places, and these are rarely locations that are commonly used for international structuring nowadays. Apart from these types of 0% companies, as I mentioned in other videos, many structures that are set up are done through companies that in theory are not pure 0%, but they have special regimes, or you can fit them as transparent entities depending on what you put underneath. And as I've previously discussed in other videos, the companies that are most commonly used for operational businesses are specific jurisdictions that, even though in theory they don't have a 0% rate, allow you to achieve that 0% target or get very close to it with some careful structuring. And as you can see from this list, I've only included places that are pure 0% tax jurisdictions, as I mentioned, which are rarely the places where people often set up companies, since they are very restricted in terms of banking and substance requirements. However, for some specific cases, they can still be effectively used. The first company would be the Cayman Islands. Strictly speaking, it would be the place where you can have a pure 0. It has quite strict substance requirements if it's an operating business. As a place of residence, it's also pure 0. It's quite typical for funds, but in terms of structure, if you wanted to establish substance there, it's an expensive place. The next one would be BVI, British Virgin Islands, and really, since it's essentially the primary emblem of the offshore world, there are some specific banks, almost more Swiss and so on, that are much more accustomed to these kinds of structures and might give you a bit more banking ease than other purely offshore jurisdictions. But even so, it's still by no means easy to open accounts for this particular type of entity. It has substance requirements like the vast majority of the others. So understand that if you want to use it to intermediate, for example, with other companies you have around the world, all of that would require a lot of substance to be demonstrated in the country. If it were a pure holding company, the requirements are actually quite light. But as I said, it depends on the activity. You could be quite limited in this regard. Another pure 0% place in that area would be the Bahamas. Let's say there is some local banking there, but when it comes to opening accounts with banks abroad, you're always extremely limited. You have to rely on high-risk EMIs, and it's an expensive setup. It's similar in Bermuda, which is most commonly used in the world for insurance and such, but not much for operational businesses. The setup is expensive, and in terms of banking, there isn't much available either. Obviously, there are substance requirements as well. And in that area, there are also pure 0% places like Anguilla. Then there are several that are IBCs, which technically wouldn't be on this list of pure 0% because that only applies to international business companies like in St. Kitts and Nevis and Montserrat, I believe. There are also some others in that area which are like special regimes for businesses that only do transactions abroad, where it would be a kind of territorial system but with a different characterization. But let's say that pure 0 would be Anguilla, and especially as I've mentioned in other videos, the Cook Islands are very commonly used for trust structuring. And sometimes, quite often actually, we set up a Cook Islands LLC above the trust so that everything remains within the same country. And in terms of asset protection, it's extremely robust. In the Gulf region, many 0% corporate options have also disappeared. Dubai lost its 0% status in 2023, and Qatar has been at 10 or 15% for years, if I'm not mistaken. In Saudi Arabia, there are taxes. Bahrain still maintains 0%, but they're already saying that by 2026, something will likely be introduced. Additionally, throughout that region, they've implemented the minimum 15% tax for large multinationals. So, well, let's say that region is also very much under the spotlight. And then we have the UK territories like Guernsey, Jersey, and the Isle of Man, all three of which have a 0% corporate tax rate. I already talked about them in a video because sometimes if someone wants that 0% rate and just a minimal level of substance and justification for other countries, it can be interesting. But as I was saying, these are places that in terms of banking and even payment processing offer options and are generally well regarded. I would even say, for example, that Apple and others have their headquarters there in Jersey. There are some differences between them. The one that's most different is the Isle of Man, which is actually part of the UK's VAT regime. So in that respect, it's probably the worst option. Then there's Guernsey, which doesn't have UK VAT. It has its own special VAT just for that territory. And Jersey, which doesn't have any VAT at all. So, well, at first glance, we've pretty much covered the different pure zero options available. As I've mentioned, these are usually not the ones that are commonly used at all. Normally, we use other types of structuring. But anyway, this gives you a better idea of the different options that exist. If you want to discuss any of these structures or any others, we can talk about it on a call. I'll leave the link in the tags in the description, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.